Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of the second season of Aclaremos las cosas, a project by Vaping Today. I'm Manuel, and remember, you can also find this full interview in Spanish.
Hello everyone, and I'm Alejandra. We're excited to have you with us again. In every episode of Aclaremos las cosas, we explore science, policy, and the evolving landscape of tobacco harm reduction. Today, we have a very special guest, Clive Bates.
Ready to understand the importance of these alternatives and dispel myths?
Let's get started.
Clive Bates has dedicated decades to public health, policy, and regulation. He served as the Director of Action on Smoking and Health in the United Kingdom during the late 1990s and early 2000s, a pivotal period in the rise of modern tobacco control. He later worked in the UK government strategy unit as well as with international agencies. Today he leads Counterfactual Consulting Limited, a policy and advocacy space centered on pragmatic public health, regulatory strategy, and harm reduction.
In the context of the WHO's COP11, where decisions are being debated that could shape the future of lower-risk nicotine products such as e-cigarettes, heated tobacco, and nicotine pouches, Clive's voice becomes essential. He urges global regulators to move away from prohibition driven by dogma, and instead adopt policies grounded in evidence, risk-proportionate regulation, and effective public health.
In this interview, we speak with Clive about the current challenges in international tobacco regulation, the dangers of ignoring scientific evidence, the consequences of banning lower harm products, and his vision for how regulation must evolve if we truly prioritize people's health.
So let's begin. Clive, thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly an honor to have you here.
We really appreciate your time and your willingness to share your expertise with our audience. Welcome to the podcast.
All right.
Clive, this is our first question. You have said that the Framework Convention has become overly bureaucratic and, as a result, less effective. From your point of view, what practical mechanism could countries adopt to rebalance power between the Secretariat and the parties without reopening the treaty in order to make the process more transparent, inclusive, and effective?
Well, it's certainly extremely bureaucratic, the FCTC and the conflicts of the parties, but also it's heading in the wrong direction. More and more of its effort is focused on stopping harm reduction approaches, even though those are part of the treaty. Article 1D includes harm reduction as part of tobacco control. But what they're trying to do is encourage prohibitions, they're trying to encourage extreme regulation, they're trying to make sure that nobody switches from cigarettes to safer products like vaping and pouches, which is ridiculous. So not only is it bureaucratic and highly exclusive, it's also heading in the wrong direction. Now, what should happen is that they should have a much greater diversity of stakeholders in the room with different opinions and different insights and different views of the science. At the moment, they exclude almost everybody who isn't exactly aligned with the World Health Organization, which has got this wrong. There are 29 observer NGOs at the COP, the FCTC COP. If you go to Belém in Brazil and go to the climate COP, there's around 4,000 accredited NGOs of every possible interest: commercial, environmental, ecological, industrial. It's everybody is in the room and everybody has a say, and it's up to governments then to work out what the best pathway is. So that's major reform. I think they should just focus on getting things done that work instead of constantly trying to expand the scope of the convention. They should stop opposing and pushing for prohibitions because they never ever follow up what happened and check on the illicit trade, the criminal networks that are involved, the unregulated products that are involved. So they don't even do the basics of policy making, which is to, when you propose something, to evaluate what happened, and they need to get better at that as well.
There's a growing sense that, in some circles, the fight against the industry has turned into an end in itself, almost a political identity, rather than a strategy to reduce harm. In your view, to what extent has this mindset become a distraction that ultimately sustains harm instead of reducing it?
There's originally a clause in the FCTC, Article 5.3, that says that the industry should not interfere or have too much influence, or decision makers need to be protected from their commercial interest. Fine, everybody agrees with that. No one would want the logging industry involved in a biodiversity treaty. No one would want the chemical industry to write the text of a chemical treaty, and so on. So that's normal. What has happened now is that though that has been elevated to be the overarching goal, which is to oppose everything the industry wants. And the problem is, what if the industry wants something, or some of the industry wants something, that is in the interest of public health? If it's a good thing for public health, it doesn't become a bad thing just because some companies think it's a good business strategy to head in that direction. That's just a ludicrous way of understanding the world. But what they've tried to do is position tobacco harm reduction, which means going from high-risk nicotine products to low-risk nicotine products, as if it's a nasty, devious plot by the tobacco industry. In fact, it's a highly rational thing to do. 1 billion people use nicotine. Surely it's better that they use low-risk products rather than high-risk products, because few of them will get sick and die.
If the Framework Convention were rewritten from scratch tomorrow, which articles would you preserve exactly as they are? And which ones would you modify or remove because they've become rigid or ideological, especially given the emergence of lower-risk nicotine products?
Well, I was involved in the early stages of the drafting of the FCTC back in the year 2000 to 2003. And I actually think it's quite a good treaty. Basically the idea was to take good evidence-based tobacco control measures and encourage all the countries in the world to take them to deal with smoking, basically, to try to reduce the level of smoking. So there isn't that much I would change in the FCTC. They just need to focus on doing those things and focus them on smoking. So I think it's right to control advertising. It's right to have some sort of fiscal approach. It's right to encourage people to give up smoking and so on. So most of those things are good articles. The problem comes because the treaty was signed and drafted in 2003. Now we have a whole range of products that were never anticipated in the original draft. So we have vapes, we have pouches, we have heated tobacco products and so on, all of which can greatly reduce risk. So the thing that I would change would be to operationalize and make real the parts of the treaty that would deal with harm reduction, make that a real part of the treaty, instead of trying to apply all the articles of the treaty to these new low-risk products. You need a different approach for them because you want to encourage their use as alternatives to cigarettes, and there's nothing in the treaty that does that.
Many low- and middle-income countries rely heavily on philanthropic funding for public health initiatives. How can they recognize that the real conflict of interest may not come from industry, but from the dominant narrative being driven by entire networks funded from abroad?
Well, governments are responsible for taking independent advice and understanding conflicts of interest. I mean, all governments deal with people who have conflicts of interest, or if you like, interests. Everybody surrounding a government has an interest of some sort or the other. They're either businesses, or they are charities with objectives. They may not have the same objectives with the government. They may be interests for a small subset of things, but indifferent to other things that governments are worried about and so on. So governments are used to doing this, which is to mediate between a large cloud of interests around them, all giving advice from their own perspective. And that's what they need to do. And they need to understand with these big American billionaire philanthropists is that there's one big rich guy speaking through dozens of NGOs, maybe hundreds of NGOs at all levels, funding the WHO, funding civil society organizations, funding these big campaign groups like Biking Strategies, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, who will arrive in a country and set up a campaign, not in the interests of the country, but to pursue the agenda of the big philanthropist, the billionaire. His ideas, almost always a him, his big ideas are being pushed through this network complex of non-governmental organizations, academics, media outlets, paid-for media outlets, and so on. So that's what they've got to understand and push back, because they are there to pursue the interests of, their own people, Brazilian people, the Thai people, Russian people, European citizens, and so on. They're not there to do the bidding or to be dragged along by an American billionaire.
After 2 decades of tobacco control, progress seems to have stalled. Smoking has decreased, but millions of people still use nicotine, often by choice. Given this reality, what should be the next logical step for public health?
There's an argument for controlling things that cause a great deal of harm, like cancer, cardiovascular. There's an argument for, encouraging people to stop, to switch, to do things. So there's a case for intervention to try to deal with causes of cancer, cardiovascular disease, respiratory illness at source. Okay, there's a good public health rationale for that. It's not been fantastically affected, but smoking rates have generally come down. But there's still a large number of people who use nicotine. There's a lot of people who like nicotine, whether we like it or not. I've never used it myself, but people do like it. They get something from it. So the question is, what do you do next? What else can you do? And the obvious thing to do is to try to make nicotine use safer for people who want to use it or don't want to stop. Okay, and we've got technologies to do that now that can reduce the risks by 95 or more percentage points. Now, that's a huge change given how much harm is caused by smoking. I mean, about 7 million people a year die from smoking. You could cut that way down if all of those people switched to smoke-free products.
Some critics argue that the Framework Convention Secretariat now operates as an independent power center, almost feudal, rather than as a body that serves the parties. Do you agree with that assessment?
I see. Okay. I think the secretariats of the FCTC and the World Health Organization and the NGOs are all quite strongly aligned. They're all pursuing a prohibitionist agenda. They're all more or less working from Michael Bloomberg's playbook. They're all functioning as one machine to try to manipulate and push the parties in a particular direction. And for me, the issue is with the parties, the governments. It's their responsibility to push back, to get sensible advice from the Secretariat and WHO, to correct them when they misuse science, to push back against the NGOs who are all not all, but many are Bloomberg funded and all saying things that bear no relation to the evidence. Governments need to put a stop to that. It's their treaty. They're the parties. The Secretariat and WHO are there to serve them, but they have to be assertive about that rather than just go along for the ride.
Finally, after 20 years and millions in funding, do you believe the Framework Convention will shift its paradigm, or is it moving further away from what actually works in public health?
Well, the direction of thinking over that 20 years has deteriorated from thinking about dealing with smoking in the early years to now thinking about dealing with alternatives to smoking, which are much safer. So instead of embracing the idea that we could deal with a lot of the non-communicable disease risk by getting people to switch from smoking to smoke-free products, it's going in opposing that. So I see that as getting worse over time. And my view now is that the FCTC as a whole is doing more harm than good. Early in its life, I would say it was helpful in driving down smoking a bit, not as much as one would like, but now it's probably increasing smoking and it's certainly increasing organized crime.
Clive, thank you very much for your time.
All right.
And with that, we conclude our in-depth interview with Clive Bates.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Remember that information is power, and in this case, power to make informed and less risky decisions for our health.
We would love to hear your opinions, so please feel free to contact us on social media and tell us what caught your attention.
We hope we have provided you with the tools to become informed advocates for this important movement and to make informed decisions about your health.
Don't forget to visit our website, thevapingtoday.com, where you will find up-to-date information on science, politics, and other aspects related to reducing the harm associated with tobacco use.
Before we say goodbye, we invite you to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whichever one you like best.
Subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming episodes.
And to take action in defense of harm reduction, you can visit thevapingtoday.com/Aclaremos las cosas. Don't forget that you can find this interview in Spanish on our podcast channel.
Thank you for joining us. See you in our next episode for another fascinating exploration of the world of harm reduction.